there are many ways of looking at life, and there's been loads of different philosophies over the millennia, um, and ontologies, right? So, what does it mean to be human? What's the purpose of it? Why? Who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Thing. What should I do while I'm here? Right? And one of them is the idea that you select yourself, and you select the time and the parents that you have to be born into, right? A little bit kind of up there for people to engage with, because it's nearly counter to the prevailing ideology around life, right? That it's all just a big accident, and things just bump into walls and then learn not to bump into walls and then turn into other things, and it's all random. There's no telos or no purpose to any of it, right? It's all just happenstance, right? But the idea that you have decided to be born at this particular time in this particular place with your particular parents that set you up in such a way that allows you to uncover your own character, right? There's something nice to that, right? Because even if you don't believe it, right, just entertaining it is kind of satisfying in and of itself, right? Because it breeds back into life this stale existence that we've all been engaged and partaking in for the last however number of years or decades. It breeds back in a bit of purpose, right? A bit of choice, a bit of volition. And also, going along with volition and choice comes responsibility. And I believe we're in the time of that now, like Hegel's self-consciousness, right? Where the very creating energy of the universe, life, human beings, becomes totally self-conscious of itself, right? It understands itself at a depth that was elusive previously, right? And I believe we're at a similar point in time, or in the age, or in an age where that is open to people now. And it certainly is, technologically, absolutely, because you have the internet where you can go and look up nearly anything, right? You can go and find information about anything nearly you want in a few minutes, right? However censored search engines and all that are, right? But with a bit of intention, you can find information on anything you want, right? So the ability to learn is certainly there, or the tools needed for learning is certainly there, right? At least in terms of information and all that kind of thing, right? And ability to find information, that's there. And the system then that governs all of these things, of society and culture maybe, and the interactions between people and nations and other nations, that seems to have deteriorated and fallen apart over the last decade, we'll say, right? Where more and more people are kind of looking at it going, I used to think that everyone got a vote and that was great because everyone matters, right? But I'm starting to look at it as just a more sophisticated version of slavery, where sure, you have a say in terms of chains of silver or chains of gold, right? Or chains of iron or chains of gold, whatever you want. But fundamentally, when it comes to decisions in your life or in areas of your life that you would want more responsibility in, you're not allowed, right? So do you get a say in how much of your own money you get to keep? You don't, right? And do you get a say in what happens to the philosophy that your nation takes, or the avenues of thought and views of the world that come from academia, come from the media, get espoused down by politicians and stuff? Very little say in that. So people are becoming more and more aware of that. And while that is an interesting study in itself, the more interesting part of that is what people's response to that is, right? So you become aware that the system that you're immersed in or born into is not catering to all of your desires and your natural inclinations, right? So in order to be a part of this society, you have to forego certain aspects of your character and your personality, right? There's a trade-off there. And a lot more people are starting to become aware of, I suppose, getting the short end of the stick when it comes to that trade, right? So what do people do with that, right? And the reason I'm on about that is because I feel that there's a massive area that is about, potentially at least, to be upended and dismantled and broken to pieces. It's like there's certain anchors. We're all adrift in this sea of life, right? And there's certain anchors or ports that people can anchor themselves to, right? To maintain a bit of sense of life and existence. And one of those is the mental health anchor, or the mental health island, right? Where you can go and dock yourself there, fully safe in the worldview and the idea that mental health is not a deficiency in any way. It is not representative of any flaw in your character or any flaw in your thinking or any flaws in your decision making. It is simply something that happens to you, right? So all of a sudden, different neurochemicals become a little bit out of whack, and that causes depression, right? But there was a meta-analysis, like a study of loads of different studies, right, done in 2020, I think, regarding the levels of serotonin in the brain and the links that has with depression, right, or the causative effect that has for depression. And what that study came up with is that there's no proof, right? There might be evidence, right, that like correlations and things that look like it could lead to whatever. But there's been no proof, decisive proof, to show that depression is a result of skewed serotonin levels in your brain, right? So that's off the table, really. Or it might go on to be proved convincingly, right? But as of now, for people to be espousing that idea, they also should be backing it up by saying, this is a theory. This is not fact. This is a theory. And where do you run into with that? You run into pharmaceutical industries, right? Who, for decades now, have got to, they get to conduct their own tests, right? So in order to get a medicine or a drug approved of in America anyway, and then in Europe as well, they have a similar body that tends to adopt some of the same approvals that the FDA in America has, right? I think it's EMA in Europe, the European Medical Association, I think. But there's a similar body anyway, and they tend to overlap massively in terms of the decision making regarding drugs, right? So in order to get your drug approved in America, you need to put it through certain studies. But what is not spoken about often enough is that these companies get to perform their own studies. And not only do they get to perform their own studies, they also get to come up with the criteria of how that study operates, right? So they also get to decide when they can stop each study. And they are under no obligation to report to you any negative findings following those studies, right? And that has worked that way for a long time, right? So there's been drugs approved that are built on the most fraudulent or shaky foundations imaginable, right? So what I would do if I had a new antidepressant, I would bring in people that had depression, and then you bring in like the placebo people, right? The people that might not have it. And you give this drug to people, and then you give a placebo to other people, right? And you might leave it 2 or 3 weeks. And if you get positive results, which you're probably going to, because if you get people that are experiencing depression and you have someone in a position of authority, a researcher or scientist, telling them, look, we are performing a study on this drug and we hope to see that this drug has a positive effect in depression. Placebo effect kicks in for people. So if you believe that you're doing something to address a shortcoming in your life, you start to feel better because you're doing something. And the feeling better might not be a result of the thing you're doing. It might just be a result of the fact that you're telling yourself, I'm trying to address this, right? So it's important not to mix those two things up, because it's very difficult to pull those two things apart and know when it's one or the other, right? So if after 2 weeks you see people having a positive effect after taking this medication, you can then stop that study. These pharmaceutical companies can stop that study there and then and go and report, look at all the positive results we're after getting. Grand. This is known. This is well studied and well documented that this is how this stuff carries itself out, right? Now, what's interesting about that is you have Robert Kennedy Jr., and again, judge people on the actions they take and only listen to the things that they say, right? So, but the things that he is saying is that he's going to go after pharmaceutical companies to be able to reproduce in a sufficient way, in a correct procedural way, the efficacies of the drugs that they've been pushing. And if they cannot show that, then they're off the market, right? So what's fascinating about this is one area that like I said a minute ago, it's going to be dismantled soon, I believe, right? And again, never mind my belief, but let's see it in action. There's a strong possibility that this thing is going to be upended, right? And a lot of new studies are going to come out, and I would suggest that they're going to show that not only is depression not a result of just these arbitrarily maneuvering chemicals in your brain, but it's a result of the decisions you make in your life, right? And the choices you make, and how honest you are between understanding who you are when you close your bedroom door at night, that you experience there and then, not the you experience when you're with people, or when you're pretending to be social, or when you're being socially pretentious, right? But the you experience in when you're on the toilet, when it's just you and yourself, and you're being you, that sort of a feeling, right? So how congruent is that with the you understand, the things you're naturally interested in, the things you naturally value and care for? And how consistent and congruent is that you with the you show the world? Because the argument would be, the less congruent that is, the more there's a difference between the you that you know when you're naturally at peace with yourself, or at least alone with yourself, and the you that you present to the world, and the you that you want other people to see. The representation of you, right? The facade, the persona that you give to the world and say, this is me, right? Judge me according to this, not according to here. The more of a schism there is between the two, the more you suffer, right? And if you continue that on for long periods of time without addressing it, or making yourself more aware of it, you're going to suffer, right? And depression is a beautiful thing at times, because what it does is it forces you to confront yourself. That's the useful thing of depression. You can only be pretentious and play the lie for so long before it all crashes down, right? You can't have your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time for any stretch of period of time. It's the same with pretending to be one way while actually being another, and the disconnect there. You can't disconnect from yourself. You can't be dishonest with yourself for long periods of time without suffering the effects of that, right? And for a lot of people, the walls crumble in and people flatten out and they become depressed. No energy. And depression forces you to examine yourself. It keeps you up at night, tossing and turning, thinking, mulling things over, right? Reflecting on things. It takes away your energy and your libido. It doesn't give you the energy or the desire to be chasing after people, or even to be getting out of bed, right? It stops you in your tracks and forces you to confront yourself and to ask yourself some serious questions. Do I want this life? And suicidality kind of often comes with depression. But I would suggest that the death that you're seeking there is not a total end to your own existence. It's the death of being fake, right? But a lot of people have gotten away with this because they're anchored in the belief that my depression has got nothing to do with me and the decisions I make and how fraudulent I am in my life and with other people. It's just this thing that happens, and I'm a victim and I suffer with my mental health. Therefore, privileges, and don't be too hard on me. I think that that's going to be upended pretty soon, and people are going to be confronted with. So I don't know who said it as well, but you hear it thrown around that hell is when the person you could have been comes face to face with the person you actually are, right? And that's a terrifying idea, right? To meet the person that you could have been if you were congruent and honest with yourself along all facets of your being, right? So who you are, who you would like to be, who you wish to be, parts of you don't want to be. When all of those things are in a healthy conversation with themselves, right? And you make a choice on who you want to be based on who you are, right? Instead of who you want to be seen to be, right? So again, full circle. What's the point of that? The age of having to accept responsibility, I think, we're in the middle of it, right? We're looking at it. People are losing their minds because they're not catching on to what's going on here. We are all being presented with a marvelous opportunity to see all idols fall, right? All stars will fall and perish. No more do we get to follow these things because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. People are losing their minds and taking their lives and giving up their existence at record clips over the last few years, and it's crazy, right? And I think you're going to see more craziness up until the point where people start realizing, do you know what? Maybe I had a part to play in losing the plot there, or refusing to see things from a multitude of perspectives, right? And I think that's where we're going. And that's why the RFK Jr. thing and Big Pharma, all that sort of stuff, that's fascinating stuff. That's fascinating stuff because it's going, I think it has the potential to knock one of the legs out from this false scaffolding and false support that people had, where they could just carry on being totally fake and just being total conformists. And then when the psychological effects of being a fake in most of your life, if not all of it, the chickens come home to roost, people can just say, oh, well, look, it's a chemical thing and I had no control over it. Or it's a hereditary thing, and damn my mother and father for passing on that bad gene to me. This is all outdated stuff. All that sort of thinking has been blown out of the water in the last couple of decades. But I think that it's going to become a little bit more mainstream. That choice and responsibility is going to pave the way towards positive self-esteem, right? The concept you have of yourself is going to be promoted instead of mental health, which just has a negative connotation now. And it's like something that people use as a get out of jail free card. Where, honestly, if it is shown to be the case, or even if it's just enough people took on this perspective, it became more common, that depression is reflective of poor choices you're after making in your life, and a poor relationship with yourself, more importantly. A dishonest relationship you have with yourself. Wow. Just that little thing alone. Imagine how different society would be if there was a common understanding that if you experience depression or maybe schizophrenia or anxiety, it's reflective of you having a poor relationship with yourself. It doesn't make you a victim. It doesn't mean you get a get out of jail free card. It means that you're after cultivating in your life a very, very poor relationship with yourself to the point where it's debilitating the rest of your life. It's after kneecapping you from enjoying your life up until the point where you confront that relationship, and then you build and move forward from there, right? So there's a beautiful, illness is there for a reason, right? And there's a beautiful thing that can be taken from them things. If you're depressed, listen to yourself, talk with yourself. Understand that you've been given this moment, as difficult and upsetting and hard as it can be at times. You've been given this opportunity to take time and reflect on yourself. Do you like yourself? Why don't you like yourself? Is there nothing good in you that you want to express in the world? Nothing you want to leave to people? Nothing you want to say? Right? You've been given a golden opportunity, so I would suggest people take it, because smelling the wind and the way things are blown, it's going to be forced on you regardless. Being able to cop out with, Josh, it's a genetic thing, that's gone now. I believe that those days are dead, and people will have to get on board with the idea that suffering in your life is a majority anyways, down to the decisions you make in your life. And I'm including having horrendous childhoods and all that stuff. I'm not saying that you're to blame for that. Of course not. But you are responsible for how you deal with that and how you respond to that. And if you get along in life long enough to be able to have a bit of reason to your mind, you can reflect on these things. And if you've taken a bad path because of that, you can reflect on that and ask yourself, what am I doing here? Like, what's going on? Why did I make those decisions? What do I understand about what happened to me? What was I responsible for along the way? What was I absolutely not responsible for? What do I feel towards those people who probably done me dirty? And how can I get on with things now? Right? Beautiful stuff and great times and positive stuff, right? And look, always you walk through darkness and to get to the light and all that stuff, right? But there are opportunities that are popping up almost daily now. And I think they're leaning towards people having to become a little bit more self-aware, having to become a little bit more self-responsible, and having to become a little bit more self-assertive, right? Or just assertive in general.